students. The next topic that we will be discussing in our second revision class, problems of Indian society during 19th century, and we are going to now talk about the economic problems that existed in the country during the 18th and 19th century. So before we get started with the economic problems, there are certain key features that you have to understand. That Indian economy was a rural economy most of the time in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, though we have seen the signs of urbanization happening. That is, urban centers are emerging. We find that centers where English East India Company has established its factories became great center of trade. However, that does not mean that rural economy was undergoing any sort of crisis, because ultimately it was in the rural society that things were growing, and those finished goods were then coming, or raw materials were then coming into urban areas and being traded off. So thus we have to understand that we were still a rural economy. So what was the economic condition? We had rural economy, we had the urban economy. Rural economy was completely monopolized by zamindars. Now zamindars, repeatedly I have mentioned, zamindars are people who have hereditary right over the produce of the land. Not the land, but produce over the land, because it was their family who must have gotten the land under cultivation. So it must be a forested areas. They got permission from the king and they got that area into cultivation. Now they cannot cultivate the entire land on their own. So they got their own kith and kin, their own extended family, and they placed them in that region. Now, actually, it was them who got their extended family to the region, so they have a right over the produce of the lands. That is how zamindars were dominant form of dominant individuals in the rural economy. Then you had peasants. It was divided into something called pahikasht and khudkasht. Khudkasht were people who were doing it on their own, or they had their own labor, and pahikasht were people who would work on somebody else's land. Or uzariyas were also called. Uzariyas were another category amongst the peasantry in the rural economy. But however, we see that it was basically the peasantry. Now, peasantry dominated the entire landscape of the rural economy. It was peasantry who's going to grow land. It is peasantry who's going to then pay revenue in kinds or in cash, sell their goods, and also this was the way through which economy was then running. However, there were certain villages which were not producing anything. They were rather a tradesman or a finished good producing villages. So a weaver village or a blacksmith village, where people were only doing one sort of profession, were also present. These were also in the rural economy, not in the urban places, but in the rural society. Such villages also existed, which were not cultivating something, rather they were producing out of it. And then we had urban economy. Urban economy was mostly dominant by merchants, traders, and also short distance and intra-trade, and also external trade. We have to understand that in the during the Mughal time period, India was one of the largest exporter of cotton. Cotton was something that was highly exported from the country. And also another thing, the black gold, that is pepper, spices, which were in abundance in the Western Ghats, in the Malabar coast, or in the Concord coast, and also this was one of the key feature which attracted English East India Company, and thus we find that urban economy was marked by following all these ideas of trade, commerce, vibrant trade and commerce. Regions like regions like Mysore, regions like Hyderabad emerged as Bengal emerged as humongous metropolitan cities, which were then having trade networks, not just within the Indian Ocean trade, but also with countries in the Europe, with China, and thus it emerged as a very cosmopolitan space. Now, while this was happening, we have industrialization happening in the 17th. In the 18th century, we have industrialization happening in Europe. Now we understand the economy pre and post industrial revolution in Europe. Now, pre-industrial revolution, the economy of Europe was completely dependent on other places. Now, we have seen during the 16th century that we have rise of colonialism happening, where European countries, especially Spain and Portugal, went outside to look for places to have to outsource raw material from. Now, after being very successful, Spain being very successful in Americas and Portuguese being very successful in India by especially Cochin and Goa by becoming one of the largest traders of spices, other European countries soon started following the trade. That's when we have in the 1601 English East India Company getting a charter from the Queen, which gave them monopoly right to trade in the region in the West Indies, that is East of Indies, and in the East of Indies, and thus they started coming to all these places to trade, to get raw materials or even finished goods, and then sell it in the European market. The first thing that they would do is get money from. So there'll be a lot of people who are going to pitch in money. A ship would be sent with certain money to places in the region of and so at Surat. From there, they're going to buy spices, they're going to buy cotton, they're going to buy them. So they are going to purchase it from the money that they have gotten from Europe. Now, as soon as they go back, then they're going to sell that at a higher profit, and the profit is then going to be divided amongst people who were part of the stockbroking company called East India Company. So this is how they were managing before Industrial Revolution. Now, after Industrial Revolution, what had happened is, earlier what were they trading in? Spices. They were trading in cotton, finished cotton goods from Europe, from India. They were taking and selling it in the European market. Now, post-Industrial Revolution, they've realized that they require raw material, not just finished goods, but raw material. So what now they're doing is they're coming back with money to India, buying cotton, raw cotton from people, taking it back to their country, getting it manufactured, getting that cloth back to India or other colonies, and then selling them. So this is how they are then dealing. Now, this is a very simple situation. However, it gets more complex when India became a colony, direct colony of English East India Company. That is, when they had zamindari rights in Calcutta, and later Diwani rights in Calcutta. They became owner of, politically they started spreading. This scenario completely changes. This is a very simplistic way where I have told you how the economy of Europe was, but now we're going to study it specifically in context of India, and we are going to study how complex this ideology then turns out. Next, we're going to study the economic crisis that happened in the country. The first concept was something which was given by a person, a very learned person, and also a very important political person of the subcontinent, Dadabhai Naoroji, and the idea is drain of wealth. Now, he has given this idea of drain of wealth in his book called Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, and he was one of the most important political leader of the time period, and this entire idea of this book that he had written, Poverty and the Un-British Rule, is there's a very critical concept of drain of wealth that he has explained. And now, what is this concept of drain of wealth? Is that he is talking about how money is, or wealth of the country of India is being taken away from India and going into the into European economy. Now, how did that happen? Now, students, before we get started with that, we have studied how earlier the pre-industrial time period, how Britishers were trading. They were getting money from Europe, gold from Europe, buying certain goods from India, so spending that gold in India, taking it back to Europe, selling it at a higher profit, and then coming back for more resources. Now, this is how bullion was flowing from European economy to Indian economy. India would have sold it to some of the other tradesmen. If it was in India, some Indian must have bought it. But now they are getting money, but this money is not Indian, not of origin. This money is coming from Europe. So Europe's gold reserve is getting deteriorating while that of India is increasing. Now this is called imbalanced trade. This is not a balanced form of trade. Now what had happened is, as soon as English East India Company got control of zamindari of Calcutta Sultanate and Govindpuri, also Madras Patnam, also Bombay, they started getting revenue. Now with that revenue, what they are not getting money from Europe. Now what are they doing is the revenue that they have collected within India, they are using that to buy certain goods from India. This is also balance of trade. Indian money is still being circulated within India. It's not as if money is going away from it. Next thing you know, when we become the Diwani, the Diwani of Calcutta is being taken by English East India Company. Now we see that entire money of India is being utilized to buy goods. Then those goods are sold into European market at a higher profit, and that money is then being accumulated in Europe only. Now this is one, how now the flow of money is not coming to India. Second thing happened is, now all the English East India Company officials are now, they are the political leaders. They are getting salary, and how is that salary going to be paid to all those English East India Company soldiers or nobles? It's going to be paid from money that is collected in the revenue. Now you are paying that money to, say, Warren Hastings. Warren Hastings is not spending that money in India. Rather, he's taking that money to Europe and making a fixed deposit there. So now you see that money is going away from the country. That money would have circulated within our economy, but now it is being siphoned off to Europe. That's one of the way how drain of wealth is happening. Second is when we have the formation of railways. Now, under the British rule, we had the starting of railway system, a massive widespread railway system. Now, when those railway systems are being made, there's a lot of investment of capital. Now, investment of that capital, English East India Company and then the British Empire is doing it. But then we are paying for everything. We are paying it in terms of home money. That is, we are paying it in form of revenue that needs to be there, because it is, though it's not made for us, but yet we are paying for it because it's a developmental activity that is happening in India. Europeans are doing it for their own good, but Indians have to pay for it. So that is how money is then being siphoned off, first in the form of salaries that are being paid to the king, to the people who are working under English East India Company. Then second is how you are paying home rent or home. I'm getting confused with the term of that particular term, but it is how you are paying for all railways, telegram, everything that is being set up in India, road system that is being made. You are paying for everything. Then the next is, now you are no more. When we have the establishment of the British Empire, that's when we find that now the revenue is not staying in India, because the queen is, or the ruler is not in India, it's going away from India, and then it's being dispersed through salaries, through everything. So money paid by Indians is not staying in India, and that is how we have the concept of drain of wealth happening. And there are several other factors also. Further, we will study in deindustrialization, how deindustrialization is also a process of drain of wealth. Earlier, you were selling your goods to to English East India Company. Now British Empire is asking you to grow what they want because you are their subjects. So now you see that now you can no more be selling it to them, you're producing it for them. So this is how the entire wealth of the country is getting drained out. Next, we have the idea of deindustrialization. Deindustrialization. So, what is the concept of deindustrialization? Prior to coming of English East India Company, we had small little cottage industry all across India. Now, these cottage industry produced textile goods, and India was one of the biggest textile producer in the world at that point in time. Now, they were producing looms of cotton, they were producing looms of silk, jute, all those things were being produced. You have a very specific sort of weaving also. So you have example being Banarsi brocade or Banarsi silk. Then you had tussar, you had Mysore silk, then you had Kanjivaram, Kanchipuram. There are several sort of textile, and these were all small scale textile industry. And how were they being functioning? So there would be somebody, peasants would be growing cotton, there would be somebody who would be weaving it, somebody who would be dyeing it, and somebody who would then be producing it into finished good, and that's how you will have, and all of this was hand loom. So, and this is how India was producing, being a producer of textile. Now after coming off the English East India Company, and already we have establishment of industries there. Now, industries can produce, industrial revolution, after industrial revolution, industries can produce more textile in less number of time, and the finished good is very uniform. So that's when now what was happening, that earlier India was, what was Europe doing after establishment of industrial revolution, industries, they took raw materials from India, produced them into finished good in their industry. So they produced looms from there. So now they're not buying the textile, they're only buying raw material from us, or they're asking us to produce raw material. Now after this, after the saturation, there has been saturation in the European market with the produced good. Now what do you do with the leftovers? Industries can only make profit if it continues production. If the production is continuous, then only you're making a profit in an industrialized sector. So now you have a lot of cotton, and already European market has reached to its saturation. Now you start dumping that extra produce into your colonies. So how does that hampers our industries? You destroy the textile cottage industry of your colony and ask them to only purchase what they are selling. So now you see that all our industries, all our small scale industrial textile industries completely got abandoned, because now we were forced to buy the finished good or finished textile that was coming from Europe. So this is how the process of deindustrialization happened. Most of our industries in production of cotton, industries in terms of dyeing, industry in form of finished good production, all came to a standstill, and this impacted our society tremendously. Now the peasants were asked to grow what Europe wanted. So we have indigo plantation happening at a rampant stage. There was compulsory indigo plantation. So this is what was, it impacted our agriculture system also, and impacted our industries, small scale cotton industries also. So this is the concept of deindustrialization. Next, we have changes in revenue system. So English East India Company introduced permanent settlement in Bengal, Mehelwari in region of Punjab, and Rayatwari in the region of Rayatwari in this region of Punjab, and Mehelwari in the region of Madras. Now all these settlements try to find out private ownership of land. Who is the owner of the land? The owner of the land has to pay revenue. Now with this, the entire, and prior to this, India did not have the concept of private ownership of land. It was either ownership in a community base, or it was just a prerogative that whoever is the tiller is going to continue tilling till the time they can. As soon as they don't, it is king's duty to get somebody else or let it remain fallow. Since it was important for king to continue agriculture, because only if there is agriculture production is when he can tax. Thus There was no concept of who was actually, was it the king? If it was the king, then king had the right of eviction, but he did not. He could not evict anybody. And if it was peasants, then peasants ownership, peasants cannot just leave their land and go to some other place. That's the ambiguity that we have. So when English East India Company came to India, they started to look for who is the owner of the land. And with that, they completely dislodged the entire rural system. The revenue system or the rural interaction completely changed. And this led to people getting affected, because as soon as you have private ownership, you have to pay revenue no matter what. Even if you don't grow anything, since that land belongs to you, you have to give revenue. Earlier, that was not the norm. If there was a barren land, or say a land which could not produce anything, Mughal ruler did not have the right to even charge them anything. But now, if you have the ownership of the land, and if you're not producing anything, you still have to pay revenue, because settlement was done on a personal basis, not on the basis of land. Settlement was now done with people, and thus we find that this entire revenue system impacted the lowest rung of the peasantry tremendously. In permanent settlement, when settlement was done with zamindar, this led them to evict any peasant at their whims and fancies. And thus, in Meherwari and Raiyatwari, when it was decided that settlement would be done with the peasant who are actual tillers, this made the peasant vulnerable to any sort of natural calamity, and yet they had to pay revenue. Earlier, zamindars were a sort of an overarching protective layer whenever there was a natural calamity. Now that is being removed. You are completely removing the hereditary right of the zamindar. So zamindar is not then going to help those peasants, and thus we find that peasants were left more vulnerable. Also, the English East India Company introduced this idea that if somebody cannot pay revenue, they have to sell the mortgage. The land would be confiscated, and some new person would be given in charge of that land. Now, this led to introduction of certain new people, new classes within the village level who did not have any association with the village as such, or village economy as such. So you find that a lot of alien elements have started seeping it at the village level, which has started creating disharmony within the village society. So this is how changes in revenue system led to a decline in our economy. Next is droughts and famines. We have discussed this extensively in class, that there were several droughts and famines during 19th century, late 18th, 19th and early 20th century. And initially what would happen is that under Mughal Empire, the rule was that if the land is banjar, the revenue cannot be charged. However, this was only if entire land was declared banjar. Now, under English East India Company, land was never declared banjar because you had private ownership of land. So now what had happened is, even if there was a famine, which then there was a drought which led to a famine, the English East India Company was still demanding revenue from the people. And this led to the position of peasants becoming extremely bad. They were being left open outright into the world where they could not defend themselves. And thus, it completely shook the backbone of Indian economy. And soon we realized that the Indian economy became so exceptionally challenged that it was not able to recover. Yet we find that India was able to survive because we have a rural base, or a rural economy was very vibrant, very productive. Yet we find that during the 18th, 19th and 20th century, rural economy and especially condition of peasants deteriorated day by day. With that, we come to an end to today's lecture, and we will continue with the next topic in the next lecture. Thank you, students.